Shalom, everybody. Welcome to Beit Tefillah and part 2 of our series on keeping the feast days. In this video, I want to discuss Passover and the week-long feast of unleavened bread. After we have determined the first day of the scriptural new year, we count to the 14th day, and then on that day at sunset, Passover begins. Passover is not a high Sabbath, it is a day of preparation. They would kill the sheep in the early afternoon and roast them with fire. Then it would be typically eaten around sunset, which also starts the first day of the week-long Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is a high Sabbath. The last day of the week of Unleavened Bread is also a high Sabbath. But first, let me talk about Passover. If you're new to the feast days, you'll hear people talking about having a Passover meal and maybe others talking about doing something called a Passover Seder, or Seder, depending who's saying it, I guess. But which one should we do? Are they both the same? How do we keep it? What's a Seder? Are we supposed to attend a Seder? Some are public, some are private. What are we supposed to do? Let's look into both ways that people celebrate Passover and answer these questions. First, let me talk about a Passover Seder. Seder is a Hebrew word for order, ritual, or arrangement. The Seder is one of the most common ways that people in the Jewish faith keep Passover, which is also known by its Hebrew name, Pesach. The Passover Seder is held on the evening of the 15th day of Nisan on the Jewish calendar all around the world. It's still a Passover feast that coincides with the first night of unleavened bread, and it's a fine way to observe it. There's just a few differences to a Jewish Passover Seder and the way Passover was kept in the Scriptures. The Seder is a ritual performed by multiple generations of a family or a community, which involves the retelling of the liberation of the children of Israel from slavery in ancient Egypt. This story is from the book of Exodus and the Tanakh. The Seder itself is based on the scriptural verse commanding the people who are Israel to retell the story of the Exodus from Egypt, as we can read in Exodus 13:8. And you shall inform your son in that day, saying, it is because of what Yehovah did for me when I came up from Egypt. In tradition, families and friends gather in the evening to read the text of the Seder called Haggadah, which is an ancient work derived from the Talmud. The Haggadah contains the narrative of the Israelite exodus from Egypt, along with special blessings and some rituals, commentaries from the Talmud, and also some Passover songs at times. Seder customs include telling the story, discussing the story, drinking 4 cups of wine, eating matzah, or unleavened bread, partaking of symbolic foods placed on the Passover Seder plate, and reclining in a celebration of freedom. There's usually 14 steps to a Jewish Seder. Let me mention each step briefly, and I'm going to put the Hebrew up here for each step as I'm talking about it here, okay? Number 1, the recital of a sanctifying or Kiddush blessing and drinking of the first cup of wine. Number 2, the washing of the hands. Number 3, the dipping of the karpas, or raw vegetables, in salt water usually. Number 4, breaking the middle matzo. The larger piece becomes the afikomen, or the dessert. Number 5, the retelling of the Passover story, including the recital of the 4 questions and drinking of the second cup of wine. Number 6, the second washing of the hands. Number 7, the blessing before eating the matzo, or the unleavened bread. Number 8, the eating of the maror, or bitter herbs. Number 9, the eating of a sandwich made of matzo and maror. Number 10, literally a set table, the serving of the holiday meal. Number 11, the eating of the afikoman, which is the half pizza matzah broken off earlier. Number 12, the blessing after the meal and the drinking of the third cup of wine. Number 13, the recital of the Hallel, traditionally recited on festivals, and the drinking of the 4th cup of wine. Finally, number 14, saying next year in Yerushalayim. And that's about it for a typical Passover Seder. There is some tradition added to it, but they are keeping the commanded feast of Passover, eating unleavened bread, and retelling the story, just as commanded in Exodus and reinforced in Leviticus chapter 23. So a Seder is one option. Before I go on, let me read some scripture about the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Here's what's stated in Leviticus 23. Leviticus 23, 5-6. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, between the evenings, is the Passover to Yehovah. And on the 15th day of this month is the festival of unleavened bread to Yehovah. 7 days you eat unleavened bread. And next is the extensive command from Exodus chapter 12 about the original Passover. Exodus 12, 1-14. And Yahweh spoke to Moses and to Aharon in the land of Egypt, saying, This month is the beginning of months for you. It is the first month of the year for you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, On the 10th day of this month, each one of them is to take for himself a lamb, according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of the beings. According to each man's need, you make your count for the lamb. Let the lamb be a perfect one, a year-old male. Take it from the sheep or from the goats. And you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then all the assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it between the evenings. And they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat it. And they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire, with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat it raw, nor boiled at all with water, but roasted in fire, its head with its legs and its inward parts. And do not leave of it until morning. And what remains of it until morning you are to burn with fire. And this is how you eat it. Your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. And you shall eat it in haste. It is the Passover of Yahweh. And I shall pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and shall smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And on all the mighty ones of Egypt I shall execute judgment. I am Yahweh. And the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I shall pass over you, and let the plague not come on you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. And this day shall become to you a remembrance. And you shall observe it as a festival to Yahweh throughout your generations. Observe it as a festival and everlasting law. Now, some of these scriptural feasts are becoming popular with different religious circles and Christian denominations, and some will even hold Passover celebrations that are open to the public. However, there are some huge problems with having public Passover celebrations or seders that are simply open to anyone. I guess they aren't aware of what it says in Exodus 12:43-48. And Yahweh said to Moses and Aharon, This is the law of the Passover. No son of a stranger is to eat of it, but any servant a man has bought for silver, when you have circumcised him, then let him eat of it. A sojourner and a hired servant does not eat of it. It is eaten in one house. You are not to take any of the flesh outside the house, nor are you to break any bone of it. All the congregation of Israel are to perform it. When a stranger sojourns with you and shall perform the Passover to Yahweh, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and perform it, and he shall be as a native of the land. But let no uncircumcised eat of it. So the Christians, they try to do something biblical, yet they don't follow the Bible when it comes to the details. This is sadly a recurring theme in their religion. Of all of the scriptural feasts, Passover is the only one that is restricted to those in covenant. No stranger is to eat of it. You must be in covenant to partake of it. The Christians say the covenant is done away with, so they are definitely not in covenant, nor are they part of Yisrael. Others are welcome at all other feasts, but not Passover. Those partaking of this, the men must be circumcised. And at public Passovers, there's no way of knowing if this requirement is fulfilled. As with those who are strangers and those who are uncircumcised, there are others who are unable to participate in the Passover meal. Those who are unclean are not fit to partake of the lamb. In Numbers 9:6-7 it states, But there were men who were defiled for the being of a man, so they were not able to perform the Passover on that day. So they came before Moses and Aharon on that day, and those men said to him, We are defiled for the being of a man. Why are we withheld from bringing near the offering of Yahweh at its appointed time among the children of Israel? There are a number of things which make one biblically unclean or defiled. It's the responsibility of the children of Israel, or those in covenant, to know these things. It's expected of us to distinguish the clean from the unclean and to guard against uncleanness or becoming unclean ourselves. And I'm not going to go into all those things in this video that makes one unclean, but they can easily be researched. Leviticus 10:10 states, So as to make a distinction between the set apart and the profane, and between the unclean and the clean. And that's to us. We are to make a distinction between those things. Those who are unclean, either from coming into contact with death or for other reasons, are not fit to partake of the Passover. Thankfully, concession was made to ensure that all the children of Israel could still partake of the Passover, as we're told in Numbers 9:10-12. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, when any male of you or your generations is unclean for a being, or is far away on a journey, he shall still perform the Passover of Yahweh. On the 14th day of the second month, between the evenings, they perform it. With unleavened bread and bitter herbs, they eat it. They do not leave of it until morning, and they do not break a bone of it. According to all the laws of the Passover, they perform it. All the rules still applied, but the Passover was held a month later. So hopefully those who were unclean or on a journey or unfit to partake of the Passover on the 14th day of the first month could partake of it on the 14th day of the second month. So people need to make sure that they set themselves apart, as this covenant meal is very specific and not to be taken lightly. These are commandments, by the way, and not merely my opinion on the matter. For these public Passover celebrations or seders, who is making sure that these people are in covenant in keeping the Torah, the Sabbaths, and all the feasts of Moedim of Elohim's? Who is asking the people if they are clean and undefiled when they come through the door? The Christians surely aren't. They preach against these things and say, oh, they're done away with, or that's just for the Jews. So what right do they have to partake of the Passover meal? They don't. They're not doing it right nor honoring Elohim's word by hosting or participating in something called a public Passover. If you read the passages in Leviticus and you follow the instructions for eating your meal, you can read out loud to your family or to your children that same account in Exodus 12 and explain why we eat this meal today and what the week-long Feast of Unleavened Bread is all about and exactly what it memorializes. This way, you will keep the Passover and guard it exactly as Elohim has commanded us. It's a little simpler than doing a Jewish Seder, and some people want to stick as close as possible to what the Scripture tells us without any tradition mixed in. However, we need to be aware of a couple things, and I want to talk about that next. As for eating a Passover lamb, we know we are not to kill a lamb today, as the Torah forbids killing a Passover lamb within our gates, but only permits it in the place that is not available to us for those in the dispersion today. Deuteronomy 16:5-6. You are not allowed to slaughter the Passover within any of your gates, which Yahweh your Elohim gives you, but at the place where Yahweh your Elohim chooses to make his name dwell, there you slaughter the Passover in the evening. See a lot of Hebrew rooters killing their own lambs for Passover, just taking them out in their backyard, slitting their throats and roasting them up. This is a commandment of what we can't do. That's right away defiling the Passover before they even get to eat it. Some people will just go buy lamb at the store and eat that and not have any problem with it. But a lot of people will, especially when they reference Exodus, where it states that we are to take a yearling male without blemish and not to break a bone of it. And who knows with meat from the store just how old the lamb was, or was it killed and dressed properly without the breaking of any of its bones, like the Torah states. With store-bought meat, we have no way of knowing for sure. When buying it piecemeal, we can pretty much guarantee that whatever was left over from the lamb, it was not burned up before morning as the Torah commands it to be. I mean, think about it. Unless you're getting it from a special Jewish butcher who is, killing it and preparing it according to the commandments, but he would have to be doing it in the place where Elohim put his name, and not in Manhattan or something like that. You can't do that. So some people will eat something other than lamb. They figure that since they cannot kill a lamb because it's really a memorial meal, why can't they eat some other meat besides lamb? And I can see their point there as well. But I'm not going to tell anybody what to do. You need to read about the Passover in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers for yourself, pray about it, and ask Elohim for guidance. Whatever we do, we need to realize once again that this is a memorial meal, and it's not a sacrifice. Passover was never a sacrifice. Now let's examine the week of unleavened bread. Here's the Torah for it. In Exodus 12:15-20, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. Indeed, on the first day you cause leaven to cease from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the seventh day, that being shall be cut off from Yisrael. And on the first day is a set-apart gathering, and on the seventh day you have a set-apart gathering. No work at all is done on them. Only that which is eaten by every being, that alone is prepared by you. And you shall guard the festival of unleavened bread, for on this same day I brought your divisions out of the land of Egypt, and you shall guard this day throughout your generations, an everlasting law. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, in the evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month in the evening. For 7 days no leaven is to be found in your houses. For if anyone eats what is leavened, that same being shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether sojourner or native of the land. Do not eat that which is leavened. In all your dwellings you are to eat unleavened bread. So as we can hear, the first day and the seventh day of the week-long feast of unleavened bread are Sabbaths, and no work is to be done on those days. During the week of unleavened bread, we are commanded to eat unleavened bread every day for the entire week. So we need to remember that. And you don't need to eat just bread and gobs of it. You can just have a piece of unleavened bread with your meal. You don't have to have it with every meal. Just eat some every day. And you can eat a lot of things besides unleavened bread, of course, but just make sure you don't eat anything leavened. Okay? We get all the yeast out of our home, and we also try our best to get other bread products and things made with yeast out of the house. Remember any bread in the bottom of your deep freezer. Don't forget croutons or boxes or bread stuffing, crackers or breadcrumbs for cooking, things like that. Take your trash out. Don't forget to empty the crumbs out of the toaster and your broiler, so on and so forth. Sweep out the bottom of your oven, things like that. Some prepackaged foods may be made with yeast, but we need to remember this is about removing active yeast so that we are only eating unleavened bread. For instance, yeast is used to ferment wine, but you don't need to get wine out of your house, and many drink it with their Passover meal, like as in the case of a Passover Seder. It's not like the yeast is going to come out of the wine, come back to life, and get into our bread. Okay? If you're making wine or beer and the yeast is still in an active state, well, all I'd have to say is I would make sure I wasn't fermenting or brewing anything in my house during Passover or the week of unleavened bread. Now, we're supposed to get all the leavening out of our house, and when you do that, please take note that baking soda is not considered leavening. It may be listed on the back of the ingredients where it says leavening, and then in parentheses it'll say baking soda, but baking soda is not biblical leavening. I did a video on that topic as well. I'm going to link this video below. Please watch that if you don't understand or if you don't agree. I can guarantee you that baking soda is not what the scriptures are talking about. Also, we need to make sure that if we're having company over and they're non-believers, that they don't bring anything leavened into our homes. Like kids are running over with lunch boxes and they got sandwiches in them with leavened bread. We don't need that during the week-long feast of unleavened bread. We're not supposed to have anything leavened in our home. And since this is about unleavened bread, we need to remember that. Leaven may be brought back into the house and eaten again after sunset on the seventh day when unleavened bread is over with. So let's do a recap for Passover. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, between the evenings, is the Passover to Yehovah. So we know when Passover is. The first month on the 14th day. You are not allowed to slaughter the Passover within any of your gates, which Yehovah your Elohim gives you. So we know we cannot slaughter a lamb to eat while we're in the dispersion. And when a stranger sojourns with you and shall perform the Passover to Yehovah, let all his males be circumcised, and then let him come near and perform it, and he shall be as a native of the land. But let no uncircumcised eat of it. Circumcision is a sign of Elohim's covenant, and no uncircumcised males are to eat of it. We need to be in covenant. Okay? But there were men who were defiled for the being of a man, so that they were not able to perform the Passover on that day. So if people are defiled or unclean, they may not eat of it. When any male of you or your generations is unclean for a being or is on a journey far off, he shall still perform the Passover of Yehovah. On the 14th day of the second month between the evenings, they perform it. So if anyone went off on a journey or if they were unclean for the 14th day of the first month, they can still partake of the Passover, but do it on the second month, and the same laws and timing applies. And you shall observe it as a festival to Yehovah throughout your generations. Observe it as a festival and everlasting law. So we know this wasn't a temporary thing, but forever. And now let's recap the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And on the 15th day of this month is the Festival of Unleavened Bread. So we know that unleavened bread starts at sunset the next day after Passover, as long as you're counting the days correctly from sunset to sunset. Indeed, on the first day you shall cause leaven to cease from your houses. So we know we must get all the leavening or yeast from our homes before unleavened bread begins. I know some people who do it on the first day of unleavened bread, but if there's not supposed to be any leavening in our homes for that week, well, you've just violated because it was technically still in your house on the first day of unleavened bread. In the festival of unleavened bread to Yehovah, 7 days you eat unleavened bread. So we know how long we are to eat unleavened bread, for 7 days. And on the first day is a set-apart gathering, and on the 7th day you have a set-apart gathering. No work at all is done on them. So we know the first day and the last day are Sabbath days. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that being shall be cut off from Yisrael. So we know what the penalty is for eating leavened bread during this week. And you shall guard the festival of unleavened bread, for on the same day I brought your divisions out of the land of Egypt. You shall guard this day throughout your generations, an everlasting law. So we know this also was not temporary, but forever. And if some of this is overwhelming you, try not to let it. I suggest if this is going to be your first Passover, you have all the requirements, and you are in covenant, that you go talk with someone who is planning a meal or a Passover Seder, and maybe see if you can go with them and you can see how it's done, and you can get a little more used to it and a little more comfortable with it. As for those who listen and obey, we are only a remnant. And the further we go, it seems like that path gets narrower and narrower. But this is Elohim refining his people. He is seeing who is truly willing to walk his ways without any of the worldly stuff mixed in. Well, I hope this video blessed you. And for part 3 of our series on first fruits and Shavuot, please see the link below in the description. Everybody be blessed and have a wonderful day.